Hello and welcome to the Snickerdoodle Knits YouTube channel. I am Jessica and I am the knitter and designer behind Snickerdoodle Knits. In this video, I am going to talk about my Spring Meadows Shawl design. So I'll talk about the inspiration behind it, the yarn, some other yarn recommendations, and just some of the techniques that I use in this pattern. So to get started, this is all inspired by spring, of course. So the yarn that I used, this is Yarns to Die For by the Fiber Studio Yarn Company, and they have these great large gradient yarn balls, and this is their colorway that they're releasing or just released for spring 2020, and they call it Spring Meadows. So they asked me to create a shawl with their yarn that used pretty much exactly 1 cake of yarn, which would be more than your typical fingering weight skein, just FYI. So that's how I got the inspiration started, and what I really wanted to start with was this leaf motif. I'll go ahead and stick in some pictures in here to show you kind of the process of the first shawl swatches that I was making, and kind of how that evolved into some different stitches, trying to figure out what worked best together before I came up with the final shawl. So, like I mentioned, there is this leaf motif. This is a boomerang shape. This is the first boomerang shape that I've designed. So the way it started is it started at this tip, and the whole thing, you work the leaf motif as you knit the entire length. So you start here, you keep working till you get down to the bottom. So it's kind of the idea of an asymmetrical shawl, but it has more curvature at the top. I don't know if you can really tell because I can't hold it all the way out, but yes. So there's the leaves, and then there's simple garter, which is just like grassy meadows, and then I have drop stitches of 2 different lengths, or do I just have drop stitches, sorry. So then I have drop stitches, which is of course like the rain on the meadows, and then I used this stitch pattern that's called floral mesh lace. So I thought that just, it works really well with the stitch patterns that I used, and I liked that it kept with the floral idea of spring. Now I wouldn't say that it looks really floral, it's just kind of a pretty mesh design. So this, of course, you could work with a gradient ombre kind of yarn, or you could work it with a solid, or you could stripe it. There's tons of different options you could do. So I have a blog post. Well, I have one blog post that talks about the whole design inspiration, talks about the design itself, kind of what I was just talking about. It might have a little more detail, and I'll link that below. And then I have another blog post that has color recommendations using Yarns to Die For yarn. So you would know that you have exactly the right amount of yarn to knit the pattern, but they have lots of different colors. So I just put up a few of my favorite colors that I think you might enjoy. Then I also have a section on that same blog post, keep scrolling down, I have yarn recommendations. So whether you can't afford this yarn, or whether you're just looking for an alternative yarn, I have provided a few different yarn recommendations, and I think they all have this gradient effect to them. So that's another option. I'll leave that blog post link below as well. Let's see. So the pattern is available on Ravelry, on Pattern Vine, and on LoveCrafts. All of those links will be down below. On Ravelry, you usually can find the most information just because they allow me to post the most amount of words, and other people can link their patterns so you can see what other people have done, their projects with this pattern. So that's a great resource if you're just trying to find information. If you have any questions, go ahead and put a comment down below. Oh, so then the techniques. The techniques are pretty simple, but I do recommend having some experience with knitting. You can be an adventurous beginner, but maybe expect a few mistakes if you aren't familiar with some of the more difficult techniques. Of course, I do have tutorials linked in the pattern to all of the techniques, so don't fret, you'll know exactly what you're doing. And of course, at any time, if you have any questions while you're working any of my patterns, go ahead and just reach out to me. I'm happy to answer your questions via email, social media, etc., etc. So I think that's everything. I hope that this video answered all of your questions about the pattern, and I hope to see you around. Happy knitting!